It really is impressive how advanced games have become in so many ways over the last 10 years or so. Whether we're talking about our frame rate standards, higher resolutions getting up to 4K, fidelity in general of various assets within the game, more complex and interesting stories and characters, or an ever-broadening scope of things that we can do online, games are truly soaring to heights that we only dreamed about 15 years ago. On the other hand, we do seem to have taken a couple steps back in terms of interaction options in the worlds in which many modern games are built. Not all games are falling victim to this, of course, but many big-name sequels to open-world games are showing signs of being less interactive than the games that they follow. Far Cry 5 being a more recent example, with all of its vastness, seems to have taken the less is more route when it comes to actual interactivity when compared to earlier iterations of the franchise. Is there some reasonable explanation to this, or is the degradation of interactivity just completely the result of designers being lazy? Why do so many modern games lack a more interactive world? I think it's important to point out that there are many different elements that can be present to make a game feel more interactive. The first and most immediate element that comes to mind is destructibility. It did seem like we were on the right track about 10 years ago with games like Battlefield Bad Company 2, where nearly any structure could be destroyed or at least torn apart with enough firepower. Sure, some of the destruction animations were scripted, but because they were so prevalent among the in-game assets, it added so much to the gunfights when stray bullets and grenades would take down the environment around the targets that you were aiming for. Unfortunately, even though the groundwork for great destructibility was clearly on display here, few games since then have followed up with the concept and made any real attempt to improve and expand upon it. Even before that, there was Red Faction, which seemed to support near endless possibilities with what you could do to walls and doorways with explosive devices, namely the rocket launcher. I'll never forget playing the multiplayer with friends and being able to not only destroy things that were in my way, but I could create my own system of tunnels into the walls of the levels with rockets and grenades that I could then strategically use to outsmart and outmaneuver everybody I was playing against. And once they caught on to what I was doing, they would one-up me with their own, and I would find myself beaten by my own strategy. Good times. But what happened to that mentality? Red Faction Guerrilla, Mercenaries 2, Just Cause, and a few other games have taken the idea to some interesting places, but even though it's been over a decade since real destructibility has been a thing, we're seeing less and less destructibility and overall emphasis on altering the world that we're given today. You'd think that if the PS2 can pull that kind of thing off, the possibilities with the Xbox One and the PS4 would be near limitless. But alas, here we are. And those concepts have been all but abandoned in modern games outside of a few titles that make destructibility a gimmick to base their entire experience around instead of just one element within a game that's meant to stand on its own 2 feet. Interactivity isn't just limited to what can be destroyed though, obviously. The content within the game and the amount of options available to the player to manipulate it can include lots of different things, from sitting around and reading lengthy books in Elder Scrolls Morrowind that largely have been shortened for newer iterations. This pattern is nothing if not prevalent at this point. Because all of the gaming franchises we see out there today are so different and come from different studios and publishers that all have different factors that dictate their business decisions, it's safe to say that the reasons for games being less or more interactive are just as varied as the different companies that make the games themselves. So pinning down any one reason to blanket the entire landscape would be far too simple. First and foremost, what's on the minds of most publishers is the cost to profit ratio, and the unavoidable truth that building more and more interactivity is that it takes more time than a less interactive world would take, and as we all know, time is money. So if you've already put your entire budget into hiring the talent, paying the developers, marketing, and various other production costs, and we all know those things aren't getting any cheaper, would you as a publisher be inclined to go over the budget to add more interactive options and destructibility? The impulse would certainly be there, but with so much money and jobs and careers at stake in game development these days, it's probably hard to justify the extra funds that would be needed to achieve Red Faction level destructibility and Morrowind level reading material. More interactive worlds are nice, and I think everybody understands that, but the fact of the matter is, rarely does it sell more games on its own. Unless you're a game like the upcoming Crackdown that makes things like destructibility the centerpiece of the entire game, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to dump the extra time and resources into that for most developers right now. Another aspect that might be driving down the motivation of developers to expand on the interactiveness of their worlds, and this might be a tougher pill for some some of us to swallow is that a lot of gamers just aren't asking for it. Sure, those of us that want it really want it, but the fact of the matter is hardcore gamers aren't the only gamers. In fact, the casual audience is still the largest chunk by far, still making Call of Duty and Madden NFL games the best-selling games almost every year. Despite the amount of criticisms that these franchises might receive from the rest of the community, casual games that are generally light on interactivity tend to still be the most successful from a commercial standpoint. So you can imagine that if the motivation for a game developer to make a game as interactive as possible was already low, the fact that the games that sell the best and bring in the biggest margins of profit are leaving interactivity to a minimal level certainly doesn't help things. Gamers ultimately need to vote with their wallets and support the few games that we do get that prop up these ideas if we want to see more of them, as well as new platforms like virtual reality that, if nurtured well enough, could turn into the new incubator for interactivity between users and software. Gamers who want deeper and more interactive worlds to play in can scream about it in capital letters in comment sections and internet forums until they're blue in the fingers, but at the end of the day, the only interaction that really matters is the interaction between your bank account and the register that you're buying your games at.
And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.